The Lord be with you. A reading from the Holy Gospel according to Luke. At that time, Jesus came to Jericho and intended to pass through the town. Now a man there named Zacchaeus, who was chief tax collector and also a wealthy man, was seeking to see who Jesus was, but he could not see him because of the crowd, for he was short in stature. So he ran ahead and climbed a sycamore tree in order to see Jesus, who was about to pass that way. When he reached the place, Jesus looked up and said, "Zacchaeus, come down quickly, for today I must stay at your house." And he came down quickly and received him with joy. When they all saw this, they began to grumble, saying, "He has gone to stay at the house of a sinner." But Zacchaeus stood there and said to the Lord, "Behold, half of my possessions, Lord, I shall give to the poor. And if I have extorted anything from anyone, I shall repay it 4 times over." And Jesus said to him, "Today, salvation has come to this house, because this man too is a descendant of Abraham. For the Son of Man has come to seek and save what was lost." The Gospel of the Lord.
Praise be to Lord Jesus.
One of the things that I have learned over the course of many, many years is perhaps the best way to understand what Jesus is saying and doing is to think for a moment about what he did not say. Because often what he did not say or do is what we would say or do. Confronted with somebody like Zacchaeus, and Jesus evidently did not seek Zacchaeus out, Zacchaeus sought him out. But Zacchaeus wasn't a very popular guy. Everybody knew he was a public sinner. You could not be in that profession without being a public sinner. Everybody shunned him. He was a wealthy man because he had made his fortune through fraud, working for a foreign occupying government and kind of being a traitor to everything that Jews held sacred. Naturally, they didn't want him in that crowd that was following Jesus. So he kind of hides from them. It was easy for him to hide because he was a little guy. Little guys tend to, sort of be unnoticed. Except, of course, when they have armed thugs behind them to get money out of you. So he climbed a tree, thinking, from this secluded position, I can get a good view of Jesus. For some reason, he was attracted to Jesus. Maybe Jesus had a reputation of not being your ordinary sort of good guy, being different. Maybe he wanted to see him and hear him, but from a position of anonymity so that he wouldn't be shunned. Jesus apparently was intending to walk right through the town with his followers. And at that point, he probably had a pretty good crowd following him. He was on his way up to Jerusalem. Probably at that point, within a couple of weeks, he was going to fulfill what he had already told his disciples, that he was going up there to be rejected, to be condemned to death, to be tortured and crucified. And, of course, they didn't hear this, to rise again. So the question is, what would you have said if you were Jesus looking up in the tree and seeing Zacchaeus there? Well, I can't speak for you, but I don't think we are all that different. I would have probably said, Zacchaeus, you're a sinner. If you want God to look favorably upon you, you'd better straighten out your life. You'd better stop doing the evil that you're doing. And then maybe God will forgive you. But unless you repent, you're gonna go you know where. Isn't that what you would have said? Be honest. Because we, in our sense of rightness, tend to look at everybody else who doesn't seem to observe the standards that we think are so important, and they are. They're not unimportant. But we tend to provide black and white, either or alternatives. You repent or you'll be condemned. Nothing in between. No other method is allowed in our mentality. So, to understand Jesus, we've got to kind of do a little violence to our own mentality. To look inside of ourselves and say, what is Jesus, in the way he's talking to Zacchaeus, what is he saying to me? Because what does Jesus say? He looks up at Zacchaeus. He doesn't use the words that we would expect to come out of his mouth. Instead, he says, Zacchaeus, come down quickly. Come on. Now, one of the things that meant was that Zacchaeus had to reveal himself. His cover was blown by that. But nobody was telling him he had to repent, do penance, confess his sins. Nobody was telling him that. Jesus simply says, come down. Why? Because I want to stay at your house. I want to have dinner with you. I want to benefit from your hospitality. Come on, let me in. Now, that we discover is the occasion for a miracle. The miracle that happened in Zacchaeus' heart because he wasn't condemned, but he was loved. And it wasn't what we tend to think of as tough love. You know, so very often when we criticize somebody else, we use the excuse that, oh, it's tough love. I'm actually loving them. It's not an act of love to let them get away with what they're doing. No, Jesus didn't approach him with judgmental love. He simply said, Zacchaeus, come on down. I want to be part of your life without any preconditions. That experience of love enabled a miracle to happen. And Zacchaeus, without any prompting, said, I'm going to reciprocate that love. He didn't say, I'm going to give up the life of being a tax collector. But he did say, if I've defrauded anybody, I will repay them fourfold, after giving half of my possessions to the poor. We see in our world around us a lot of people who have amassed great wealth, who also feel that they have a platform for criticizing people simply because they are poor and haven't had those opportunities. I'm not going to get into that further, but I am going to say Zacchaeus suddenly realized that what he owned that he did not need for basic necessities did not belong to him. And so that was the first element of his conversion. So much of what I have doesn't really belong to me. It belongs to people who do not have. And that has been a Christian tradition right from the beginning. Throughout Christian history, the most consistent thing has been what you have and I have that is beyond what we need doesn't really belong to us. So that's one miracle that happened. The second miracle was a recognition of his own sinfulness. If I have defrauded anybody, notice he didn't say, he didn't make a confession of his sins and receive 3 Hail Marys for a penance. He went right to the heart of things and said, if I've defrauded anybody, I will make amends. I will repay fourfold. Now, that could very well have landed him in poverty. And apparently, that was going to be okay. So what is this saying to us? Well, I think the first thing that we need to look at is inside of us. Are there elements of our own personality inside of us that are attracted by Jesus and yet want to hide from him? Can we let Jesus into our own lives in a way that says to those parts of our hearts that are fearful, come, I want to be with you. I want to stay with you. And then having looked inward, we need to look outward and say, where are the people around me that I tend to judge? That I would like to say, straighten out. And maybe adopt a different tactic towards them. Maybe learn from Jesus. And simply find ways, and this isn't easy, find ways to be present to them with some form of the kind of love that transforms us. So we've got the model here of how Jesus operates. The question is, can we let him operate that way in our own lives.